So welcome, good evening, everybody. It is so nice to have so many of you with us. If you've been to events already, I hope you've been enjoying our FMJ Summit. And if this is your first one, then I hope you get a lot from it too. We've got a fantastic panel of museum managers and directors who've already given me a little kind of one-to-one session, so I'm very grateful for that. But we're here this evening to talk about what it's like in the more day-to-day to be a museum director or a museum manager. Lots of us maybe think that we want to be in charge, but what's the real story behind that? And we're going to discuss our skills and experiences that are needed to excel at this work, and as well how to kind of carve that career path forwards for you. We'll discuss the highs and the lows, and we've got a range of experiences here on our panel, so it's going to be really informative. But so we all know each other and a little bit about one another. I'm going to ask the panel to just introduce themselves and the organisation that they're leading. And if I could start with Fran, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. So I'm Fran, Francis, if it's formal, I suppose. I'm the director, the interim director at the Jewish Museum London, which is a sort of medium small museum, independent museum. I stepped up as the interim director in end of March, beginning of April, so right at the beginning of lockdown. And previous to that, I've been at the museum for about 7 years as the director of learning and engagement.
Thanks so much. And Ellie?
Hello, I'm Ellie Collier. I'm the CEO of Arnos Vale Cemetery. We are a Victorian cemetery in Bristol. So it's interesting running a cemetery in a pandemic. But yeah, I've been there for 2 years, and yeah, it's interesting times.
Yeah, I think we can all agree with interesting times. Laurie?
I'm Laurie Jones. I'm the senior curator at the Royal College of Physicians Museum in London, which is, the museum's actually only 4 people. It's not the host of curators that my job title makes it sound, but we're a tiny part of a much wider charitable organisation that's not a museum.
Thanks. Farhana?
Hi, I'm Farhana. I am the Museums Business Manager for St Albans Museums. We are a regional museum based in Hertfordshire, and we are local authority funded. So quite an interesting time. I took, like everyone else has been saying, I took over the role in January, so 1st of January. And this role has been completely different to what I was anticipating. And prior to that, I was the marketing manager at St Albans Museums, and I had a background in marketing and in learning.
And Marcus?
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Marcus Harshaw, or Zarshaw, on basically all social media. And I've been in several museum leadership roles here in the United States, but I'm currently the senior director for museum experiences with the Carnegie Science Center.
Thanks so much. So we're going to start with the question that's probably on everyone's mind. Who really calls the shots in your organisation? And I'm going to start with Fran with that one again.
Thank you. This is like a really interesting question. I thought about this one when we saw the title of today's event. I think it's true, like in many ways, that you know, being in the position of director gives you the ability to make decisions and to be in charge and to call the shots. And there are many things that I do that on a daily basis. I make lots of decisions, heavy decisions about budgets and staffing and programming and our strategic focus. I also sign off our audit process and governance review. So there's lots of things that you absolutely do call the shots on. But when I was thinking about perhaps sharing something that is perhaps less talked about in this sort of forum, I think one of the things that I've really realized over the last sort of 9 months is that, you know, our relationships with our trustees are so important. There's an interesting dynamic that happens. You go through your whole career having maybe, you know, one boss, a line manager, maybe 2 if you're in one of those dotted lines systems, but really you only have this sort of one person and people above them. And then suddenly you go from that, particularly when you go from a senior leader position that I was in, like in my director of learning, why I had the director above me, to suddenly having a board of trustees. And you can have 5 trustees, you can have 16 trustees, and suddenly they're all your line manager. They're all the person who they can all call the shots in different ways, and they can outvote you and they can make those sort of very big decisions. The budgets that I put forward have to be signed off by the board, and the boards have been a lot more hands-on, I think, probably in the last 9 months, and a lot of boards have been over many years previous to that. So I think it's an interesting dynamic that I don't think is often talked about, that that new relationship I've had to find as well with myself, of working with a lot of people who are technically my boss but aren't staff. It's a whole new relationship for me.
Oh, thanks. And Laurie, how about you?
Well, I think partly because of the structure I sort of mentioned in my introduction, day to day, I think so, decisions about like what the museum is doing in a sort of practical sense, or, what we're putting on social media, what we're doing for exhibition, that sort of thing, is very much me. But equally, because we sit as part of a wider organisation, those things that I have absolutely no control over, so use of the space in the building, which obviously impacts on the museum's work a lot, and sort of broader questions like that, I can have some limited input into, but it's basically not me at all. And it's a really strange sort of combo of being completely in charge and also not at all in charge at all.
That's really interesting to hear, that kind of there's control and also a lack of control as well. A lot of people were really curious about people's journeys into museum leadership. So I wondered if you could describe yours, please, Marcus.
Sure. So my journey is anything but normal. In fact, I think that the big takeaway is that there is no real straight line journey into museum leadership. I started in this career not actually wanting to work in museums. I was like, yeah, I want to be a teacher. And then two years into a degree, it's like, I never want to see children ever again. And so I ended up going into the museum field and really starting on the front line. So taking tickets and selling tickets and memberships and those kinds of things. And what I was exposed to was that there are so many different career paths and choices in the museum field. And I was able to, work on some degrees and also kind of fish through working in exhibits, tried some things from the registrar, did some things in education to kind of find out where I really enjoyed. And then I was able to focus on that path. So there is no linear path in this world. And I think that's also really fun. And that's what makes the people in museums really terrific, because there's a broad range of experiences that really are helpful in a museum.
That's great. I think that echoes a lot of what was said in some earlier sessions today about not having a linear path is really normal. Farhana, how about you?
So yeah, again, it wasn't a linear thing. I didn't really know that I wanted to work in museums. And where I started off was doing a traineeship with an organisation that's now called Culture And. When I did it, it was called Cultural Cooperation. And I was based at Historic Royal Palaces, and that's where I started off in the learning team there. And I think I learned a lot in my traineeship. It was a year-long traineeship. I ended up kind of using that opportunity to find a niche, and I knew that the traineeship would come to an end, and I just had to be in that sector. I think that's when I realized that I really did want to work in museums. So I ended up working in learning for a little bit, then kind of did a little bit of marketing whilst I was in learning, then moved over to marketing completely, because I think if you're quite really determined about working in the sector, you kind of just try and find ways of fitting yourself in, and I think lots of people do that. And so my like reasoning behind that was just that I wanted to do something. So I moved into marketing, and it was really, really fun. It was engaging. I could tell the stories that I thought were really important. And yeah, so I moved from organization to organization. I kind of moved up as I was going through my various marketing roles. And then when the opportunity came to take on the leadership position of being the museums manager at St Albans Museums, I almost didn't do it because I didn't think I had enough experience, and that I needed, like I said in yesterday's session on leadership, that I needed a decade more experience, that I thought I needed 10 more years before I was ready. And I was convinced by a kind of another colleague to go for it, and I did, and that's how I ended up in the position that I'm in now. And it's scary every day.
I can see a lot of nods there. Ellie, would you mind telling us a little bit about your journey into your leadership role?
Yeah, so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I loved heritage. And so I did an archaeology degree, and I did an archaeology master's, and I worked in the field for quite a few times. Well, quite a few years, sorry, not times. And one winter I was doing a delightful pipeline between Bridlington and Scarborough, and I had snow up to my knee. And I was just like, I just want to be somewhere warm. And what I didn't know at that time was that museums are not much warmer than a pipeline between Bridlington and Scarborough in January. But I'd already invested in the thermals, so I was in a good position. And I moved into museum and heritage. So I've worked in historic houses, I've worked in museums, I've obviously now worked in a cemetery. And a lot of those roles were project management roles. So project management, I would say, gives you great skills for leadership roles. So there's all the financial management you have to do, there's all the persuasion, there's all the pulling things together, taking people with you on a journey. There's fundraising, there's all sorts of things that have been absolutely invaluable in now leading an organisation. And I think the thing that really drove me to want to do this was I did some work on what my personal values were. And I was constantly frustrated in the roles I was doing, and I didn't know why. And it was because my values weren't completely chiming with the organisation values. And I thought I can either whinge about this or I can do something. So then I started gunning to run an organisation and really bring to the fore the things that I think are important and that I passionately believe in. So really delightfully, when Fair Museums Jobs published their manifesto, because I now lead this organisation, I could say, we are doing this. We are doing this, this is important, and I could make it happen. And we haven't got it 100% right, but just having that agency to make things happen is amazing.
Yeah, wow. I feel very quite moved listening to you. This sort of comes back off the back of what you were saying, Ellie, and it's a question that someone sent via Eventbrite, but it's a question of like, how did you know you were ready to move up, or did you know that you were ready to move up? I don't know if Farhana has got something to add to that.
Yeah, so I think when I wanted to move into a management role, I felt ready to do that. I felt like I wanted more responsibility. I think I felt like I'd proved myself. I felt like, that I was ready for the next step. When it came to taking on a museum manager position, definitely did not feel ready for that. And it did take some convincing for me to feel like I had the skills and I had the knowledge and I had the experience. And I think there is quite a lot to be said about imposter syndrome, and a lot to be said about kind of convincing yourself that you're not good enough or that you're not ready. So from my own perspective, I don't think I would have ever felt ready. I would have always thought there's something that I haven't quite ticked off, or I haven't quite got all of the years of experience that they're looking for on a job application, or that I haven't done quite this way of wording something. And I think if you've got a good network around you, or someone who can give you a bit of a kick up the bum, or if you could do that to yourself, if you can give yourself a pep talk and just say, what, why not just throw your hat in the ring, take a punt. you'll never really know unless you try. And it has been a huge learning experience. I don't think when I took on the role I was imagining that COVID would have happened and that we would have had to change our programming and our output completely, and our budgets completely, and all of those kind of things. So you're never going to have 100% all the skills that you think you need. It's just whether you can back yourself and just, push yourself into that.
Lucy, can I say something on that as well? I just want to say, because I've got a sort of similar story to what you mentioned before, Farhana, about the only reason I've got my current job, because I'd already decided not to go for it, was the woman who was leaving it was like, oh, I think you could do that job. And then I was like, okay, I'm not sure. I don't think I want it. And as it got nearer to the deadline, I was like, actually, I really don't want anyone else doing that job. Sort of surprised myself being ambitious, I guess. And I think there's an element of being able to identify imposter syndrome, because I know that's a thing that, and I think a lot of people in the sector struggle with a lot. Even just being on this panel, to be honest, I'm like, you guys are all like way more senior than me, like what the hell. But also kind of like knowing yourself a bit. So I've realized sort of, after a while in the workplace, that if something scares me, it's probably something I should be pushing myself to do, because it's just that I'm comfortable, and actually I do quite like challenges. It's just deciding to do it, which is the difficult bit. And I guess you only really get that kind of self-awareness through experience, but kind of just keeping an eye on what you're thinking and stuff as well, and not necessarily limiting yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I've been in a session yet where imposter syndrome hasn't been mentioned, which I think is a combination of us being used to it and also it being a really bad thing. Building on what obviously you mentioned the pandemic, Farhana, I wanted to ask, how has your leadership had to respond to the pandemic? And you touched on it as well, Ellie. Like, has your style changed? Obviously your organisations have changed, but in terms of your kind of quality as a leader, how do you think you're doing? I think is what I mean. Ellie, you're giggling, so I'm gonna ask you.
I mean, that's a horrendous question. How do you think you're doing for a room full of people with imposter syndrome? So I would say what people look for from me, particularly at the moment, is certainty. And what I absolutely cannot provide them is certainty. So I make sure that I am really open about that, and that as a team we approach things and we discuss them and we work out what it looks like for us, because what it looks like for us will not be the same for any of you, or anything like that. So I've always been quite collaborative, but I think that's really the pandemic's really pushed that to the fore. And as a team, we're a small team. I think there's effectively 13 full-time equivalents in my team, so we need to look after each other. That is absolutely key. And we need to work together, and we need to share information, and we need to share it in a way that we haven't, we're not standing in people's doorways having a cup of tea anymore. So we need to make sure we're having those conversations. And I think the biggest thing for me, which has only occurred to me in the last week, so I'm very keen to share it because I do think it's really important, is about speed. So we've all been trying to work flat out and just do everything that we're used to doing. And actually, we need to recalibrate what can be done in the time, because everything takes longer in COVID and everything is harder. And that's all right. And just as an organisation, we needed to recognise that, and we needed to give ourselves space to be able to deal with that.
Thanks, Ellie. Yeah, I think there's some positive feedback in the chat there. Marcus, your pandemic experience is not necessarily the same as ours. How has that affected your leadership?
So, I mean, it's not necessarily the same, but at the same time, it is, because as she was just sharing about how time is very different. One of the things in my leadership that I've changed is really making sure to be supportive of the team I have and asking them to be just for grace for everybody because things are slower, or for much of the pandemic, I think we've had two other fires going on. We've had a lot of racial unrest here in the States that has been difficult for people of color to even get up and feel comfortable going to work, let alone do the job. And so we have a lot of times where we've had to just say, look, you need a mental health day, you need to take care of yourself, and these projects that aren't getting done, that's okay, because pandemic. And then at the same time, we've had a very tumultuous presidential election cycle. So all of these things are, happening here stateside have really made things, again, we've also had to really slow down, take stock of what we've got going on, and really kind of calibrate. I love the use of the term calibrate, because we had to really recalibrate as to what's important, right? So here in the States, tomorrow is our national Thanksgiving holiday. And we have to really think about what we're thankful for right now, because 2020 has been a dumpster fire. But, recalibrate, think about what's important, and support those things.
Thanks so much, Marcus. Building on something that you mentioned, one of the questions that we talked about in advance was the fact that in museum leadership, white men are still the predominant group. And I just wanted to ask the panel, how they see this is changing. Is it changing? And what can be done to kind of support that change? And I wondered if I could start with Fran for that one.
Yeah, I think there's no getting around that fact, is there? Interestingly, we're predominantly women on this panel, which is interesting. I think there's also a difference between who we see at senior leadership level and then who you see at director level. I very rarely go to any sort of director level meetings or anything and find many women there, truthfully, and that's quite a shock for me, having spent most of my life in the museum sector where I'm mainly 90% women. So it's definitely a shock. I think there's also proportionally more men on my trustee board and on most trustee boards as well. So again, that's like a different dynamic. I think, yes, there is obviously this disposition, but I think it's more than that as well. I think there are very few. I come from a learning background. There are very few people who are at director level who come from a learning background. A lot of them come from either curatorial backgrounds or they come from outside of the sector, and that's a whole other conversation I'm sure we could have. But I think there's so much to that, and I think there's also as a queer person, very few other people I ever meet who I know, if they're openly talking about it or not, queer. And I think there's so many levels of the things that we're missing from our senior leadership, whether that's like senior leadership teams or our director level teams. There's just I think because there's this natural historical tendency to come from a pool of people, whether that's the curatorial side of museums, because it's the professional sort of side that's seen to the within that sort of idea. I think it just lends itself then to a smaller group of people who are going for those posts. And I think there is, again, with this imposter syndrome, I think there is, we've all felt it. We're all talking about it really openly at all of the events in this summit. I think women tend to give themselves a harder time. I think people from minority backgrounds across the time, we all give ourselves a much harder time than potentially you do if society has built you up to think that you are completely capable, and not only that, you are entitled to those spaces. That's just something that we experience very differently.
Thanks so much, Fran. Farhana, did you have something to come in on there?
Yeah, I think, like Fran was saying, it is an undeniable fact that most museum directors are men. I think, there was a glimmer of hope for me when Sarah Wajid and Zach Mensa were made co-CEOs of Birmingham's Museum Trust. And I think throughout the sector, that was kind of lauded as a really good move. It was something that I think made a lot of people hopeful, because I think prior to that, we were hearing about people who were coming from Amazon to take up, leadership positions in our big nationals. so I think there is a bit of change happening. I don't think it's happening, fast enough. I don't think it is something that is building momentum. It feels like these at times when people who aren't white men who are put into these positions, it's few and far between, and that's why it feels like a hopeful thing. It's not common enough to feel every day. I think there's a lot of work that we do need to do as a sector. And I just wanted to share one quick anecdote. When I went into my first management position, in my first week, someone thought I was a cleaner. So I think that kind of goes to show the amount of work that we still need to do. There's still a huge hurdles and mountains that we need to climb before we get to a point where we feel like there's parity across the board.
Can I
Thanks,
just
please
jump in? I think particularly at director level, the people who are the interview panel are trustees. And as we know, trustees are predominantly white old men. I applied for a lot of director and CEO roles before getting this one. I got a lot of rejections. And at one stage I was keeping a tally on the people who interviewed me, and I can't remember the exact stats, but it was around 26 men to 2 women. And so my plea to actually everybody in this room is get yourself on a board, because you can be the change. We have to do something about it ourselves. We can do something about it. Organisations are desperate for good, passionate people to be on their boards, and it is something you can do. You will learn so much, and you can influence who will be the next set of directors and CEOs.
Thanks, Ellie. Marcus, I saw you kind of nodding emphatically. I wondered if you could add in as well.
Yeah, all those points were awesome and very well made. I mean, stateside, it's interesting because it's still a lot of old white guys running institutions. And it's interesting because we're seeing these yay, we have this woman running a science center. Yes. Or a major art museum, but it's still very few in the 35,000 museums we have across the United States. Me and some colleagues of mine here, we all found each other on Twitter. We figured out we were the only 4 Black male chief educators in museums in the country. And we found each other on Twitter and we were like, well, we're the 4. Let's keep in touch and talk about sort of the differences and the challenges it takes to be in our roles. It takes a lot to become a chief education officer in a museum in the States, at least, and be a Black male, because we're pretty few and far between. As for museum chief executives, at least, women of color are badly underrepresented in those roles here in the States. Badly represented. And I love the point that, I mean, you have to look at the trustees and the folks that are making those hiring decisions, right? So until those folks change or the attitudes change, that's not gonna change. And what stinks is they may be old enough that they may not be around for long, but it's a long time to wait. And we shouldn't have to wait. We should have the right people in the right positions. In a lot of instances, women are going to be better qualified for a lot of these positions in the first place. And yet, because those trustees feel a comfort because it's somebody that looks like them, is how we get into these situations. So until that changes broadly, we're going to see the same kind of leadership.
I think I'm doubly determined to get myself on a trusteeship now. Thank you. Yes. I think this builds off the back of what you're all saying, but this is a question about leadership and looking after yourself and self-care. And how do you balance your time and all the myriad of pressures that you're feeling with everything else in your life? And I wondered if I could come to you, Laurie.
Sure. Yeah, it's something that I've been in my I've managed people before, but I've been in my current role for just, I think, exactly a year now, actually. So it's something that I sort of struggle with quite a lot to start with. And I think actually working from home has, in a lot of ways, made that easier, but then also obviously made it harder because, I mean, particularly because I'm in London, it's like a tiny space, like I work there and then I sit here in the evening. But I've sort of managed by being really strict for myself. So like, even though I, there's no administrative function for it within my work, I keep a timesheet for myself to keep an eye on what hours I'm doing, make sure I take enough breaks, make sure I'm not working like way more than I'm contracted to. Also things like just sort of managing my thinking. So I'm very much like a worrier. If something's in my head, I need to get it out some way, otherwise I'll keep thinking about it. So I keep a notebook next to the bed so that I can write things down and just get them out of the way, like not have to try and remember them, not have to worry about them. And then I look at that in the morning. Equally, like if I'm out and about thinking something worked, just write it on my phone straight away and then it's out. So like, yeah, practical things like that I found quite helpful. There's definitely ways in which I still worry about things a lot. So if anyone else has any top tips, I'd like to hear them as well.
Yeah, I think we could all do with some top tips. I don't know if you have any, Farhana?
I don't think they're top tips at all. I live with someone who is incredibly strict about work-life balance. He's a social worker, and so there's a huge pressure for him to have that kind of delineation between work and play. And so that has been quite good way for me to learn how to make that distinction. And again, like Laurie, I have a little notebook as well. Like it's about kind of getting those worries out of your head, because I think there is a tendency to fixate if there's no way of kind of getting that problem outside of your brain. You just end up keep going over and over again. I think there are some points in a working week where you just have to make that decision that sometimes you're going to have to work late into the evening just to get kind of a funding bid done, or a big piece of work that needs your full brain space. But I think the only way that you can really ensure that you've got that balance is just by being strict with yourself, and no one's going to kind of pat you on the back for working 60 hours a week. Instead, they're kind of just going to end up expecting you to do that, and then you've just kind of set yourself up for a real hard time, really.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had quite a lot of questions come through about how to move, how to progress yourself towards kind of a management role. But one in particular that I think is really interesting is, how do you find good models of leadership if they are absent in the organisation that you're in? Marcus, would you like to come in on that?
I always talk about the importance of having your own personal board of directors. So as you're building your, all the people in the field that you're comfortable with, having really some real critical conversations about yourself and your career and how you progress and what you need to learn or whatever that looks like. Having that trusted core group of people that are a lot of times either peer or senior to you that you can lean on in that way is supremely helpful.
Thank you. And Ellie, how about you?
I'd really echo that. And weirdly, I found Twitter really useful for finding those people. It's that I can't underestimate the value of having a network of people you respect and whose opinions you value. And, you know, there are people, particularly during the pandemic, actually, that I've really kind of engaged with, who I've maybe been in a room with before, but we've not really spoken, and that's been actually wonderful to have that knowledge. I would also say, to bang the drum that I've been banging a lot tonight, if you want to see other good leadership, be a trustee, go to other organisations, see what's happening there. And the other thing I'd say that's really useful is finding a mentor, and that doesn't have to be someone in museums. My mentor, she runs a charity that's not a heritage organisation. It's actually a health charity, but I respect and value her opinion. She's a great sounding board. You know, it's just, and that's the thing, is you have to search for these people, but they are there, and people love it when you ask. You know, it's such a compliment if somebody asks you to mentor them, and generally people are really excited to be asked. So, you know, don't ever feel that you can't ask, because the worst is they'll say, oh, I haven't got time, and then you've lost nothing.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Can I say something quickly on that as well? Just thinking about, you know, if you're surrounded by people you consider to be bad leaders or not very good models, that doesn't necessarily mean there's nothing to learn from them, because just flip it. Whatever it is they do that doesn't work, or that you hate, or that, you know, just doesn't work in the organisation, there's something to take from that. You know, they're the opposite, or how could they be doing it in a different way? I mean, I've been lucky enough to have generally quite good managers and stuff, but, you know, if you're looking up the chain, or if there's ever something you don't agree with, like, think about how you would do it differently, or how it could be better. And, you know, hopefully you've all got really excellent models, but I know that's not going to be the case for everyone. So there's, yeah, still stuff you can take away.
Thanks so much, Laurie. We had another really interesting question that was about if you're within an organisation and you want to put yourself forward to take on more tasks, how do you do that without it coming across that you're stepping on other people's toes? And I don't know if you had any advice on that, Fran.
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously tricky. It depends, like we all know, the politics of museums. Sometimes it's not easy to feel like you can grow within a position if that's not something your line manager's keen on. We're giving you more responsibility, or letting you be a budget holder, for instance, or, you know, line managing people. Like, sometimes I think it's just not going to happen there, and that's, I think, the reality of it. At times like that, I've gone outside the sector, you know, to pick up those skills in different places. I became, you know, parts of different networks, whether that was like GEM reps or school governors. I'm on advisory boards for other museums and heritage sites who have HLF grants, because they often have advisory boards which aren't trustees, so they haven't got the level of responsibility the trustee has, but you still get that experience of decision making and budget watching and that sort of thing. So I think if you want to sort of try out those skills, I think what I did, and what I often say, is sort of write out those skills that you're looking to gain, and then see if there are anywhere else you can get them other than just in your museum. I mean, worst case scenario, broader experience. You know, I think there's no downside to it, really. And, you know, it's great when you can bring that back to your museum, and it'd be great if every museum valued it in that sort of way, but it doesn't always work. So I think trying to find alternatives is always a good thing for yourself.
Thanks so much, Fran. I've got another question that's more about can there be, or do you feel that there can be a disconnect from your role as a leader in an organisation and what's happening to staff? The person who submitted the question used the phrase rock face. So how connected do you feel to the kind of front of the services that you're leading? Fran, you're nodding. Would I be able to ask you again?
Yeah, I'll start. I think this is something I really worried about when I took over the interim director post, because I came from within my team and was very closely connected. We have a very tight team, and at the same time we all started working from home. It was a real consideration. I've had lots of bad experiences when I felt like my managers and department heads really didn't understand what was going on day to day. I think it helps that I came from within my own organization. I know the programs, I wrote them, I know the rooms, I know where the chairs are kept, I know I built the booking system, so I feel very connected, and I can still answer questions on those sort of day-to-day things, actually, and because I've been there so long, I often know the answers. But actually I've invested a huge amount of time, and I've prioritized my time to keep contact with my team. It's, I put a real emphasis on it. We have 3 times a week where we meet for, on Mondays, we talk to each other through what everyone's going to be doing. We have a Wellbeing Wednesdays every Wednesday where we come together and we just do something not related to work. On Fridays, we do snaps, which is talking us through, saying thank you to other team members, which is great as like a morale thing, but it's also amazing for me because I don't see what's happening every day, but someone can say, oh, this person helped me do this thing, and it's a really nice way for me to stay engaged. And then I make the time to lead CPD sessions once a fortnight for my team. So I think you have to prioritize it. It's really easy to drift away because you get pulled in another direction. You get pulled away by your trustees, by your funders, by your stakeholders. Like, your life belongs to those people, for a percentage of your time. So I think you have to really make the effort and remember why it's important. And I'm not finding it easy. I think you can, as soon as you find yourself in someone else's shoes, I suppose you start seeing it from their point of view again, don't you? And I think I've definitely seen how easy it would be to drift away and just start focusing on strategic and forget what it's like to have to teach, for a 6-hour day without having a lunch break and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think there are things you can do, but I think it takes real time, commitment, investment.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Thanks. Farhana, did you?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of echo what Fran was saying. We're quite a small team at St Albans Museums, and it, all of my managers that are under me, as well as and I as well, we have been working front of house shifts. We are still very much engaged with what we're offering to our visitors. We have, like Fran was saying, we have Tuesday tea breaks and Thursday tea breaks where we all just kind of get together over Zoom or Teams or whatever, just have a chat. I think it helps being quite a small team that you can kind of engage with people. I think once you get into a larger organization where it's more than kind of, I don't know, we're about 23 FTE, including our front of house team. When it gets bigger and bigger than that, I think that's when it's harder and harder to keep engaged with what's going on the ground. But I think, yeah, it is a thing about prioritizing and making that conscious decision that you're not going to disengage, and you're not just going to be making decisions from on high that people just have to get on board with. I think you need to make sure that you understand how those decisions are going to impact the people who need to live them day in, day out, and you can't do that without being engaged or being at the rock face, as the person said.
Thanks very much. Thanks. How does it differ in your big organization, Marcus? Does it give you a different perspective?
Yes. It's much harder. Just my team alone is 150 people. And so, yeah, you have to really, I think Fran even mentioned it. You have to commit, right, to getting to, is it the rock face? That's new. I'm about to use that. But you got to commit. And I think probably many of us on this panel, many of the folks participating, on this, probably are like me, started as that rock face frontline employee. So we know how it feels, right? We know how it feels to have leadership that kind of ignores us, walks by and doesn't, acknowledge our presence or existence. And so now that we're in these leadership roles, we actually still remember that, and we hearken back to that, and we can go back to those folks and really commit to making those folks feel like they're important parts of the organization, which they are.
Can can I jump in again?
Yeah.
This isn't so much relevant for me specifically because we're so small that I work with all the museum team every day. But a friend in a big organisation told me what her manager used to do, which I really like the idea of, which was that I don't know how frequent it was, every few months maybe, he made time to spend half a day with each member of staff with whatever they were working on that day. So, front of house or collections documentation or just literally whatever was going on, they got to choose what he worked on. He just came and helped them with it. And I mean, I think my friend found it a bit awkward, but I really liked the general idea of it and just that way of keeping in touch with everyone.
Yeah, I like that vibe. Ellie, yeah.
I think it's really important in whatever you're doing in senior leadership to retain a sense of inherent curiosity. And as soon as you lose that curiosity, that's when you start to detach. I go and work on the front desk. Sometimes I clean the toilets, all the good things. But I'm not so curious about that, but I do it. But I think it's really important to engage with all the different aspects of your organization and just be interested in it, ask questions and find out what's going on, because I can't remember who said it, but the importance of understanding the impact of your decisions on who's delivering them is absolutely essential. And if you haven't got that dialogue with your team and you're not being curious and finding out, then I think that's when the problems arise.
Thanks very much. I'm going to just move on to a question about criticism now. How do you feel when the organisation you lead is criticised? And I wonder if I could come to you, Laurie, for that.
Well, I guess for me, there's two different sides to this. If the museum is criticised, this is probably not very professional, but I feel like super defensive. And that is because it's really small and because, it's a handful of us who do everything. And I think from the outside, because we're part of a wider organisation, it looks like it's bigger than it is. But because I know that it's so few people, it's people I work really closely with and get on really well, it feels really personal. Whereas if it is the Royal College of Physicians as a whole, they do huge amounts of different stuff. It's like a medical charity primarily, and so if it's them, then it doesn't really bother me because I don't really feel like it's directed at the museum. Yeah.
I like that separation, definitely. Fran, how about you?
I think it's really hard. I'm not gonna say that I find this really, really tricky. I think I'm so passionate about the museum I work at. I believe so much in what my team do that, when someone says to you, oh, here's some critique, it is a bit, and you want to think, and I have to take a step back sometimes and I think, just check myself before I say something and just see if it's feedback, if it's critique, helpful critique, or if it's an attack. And I think sometimes checking where that person's coming from is important. The truth is a Jewish museum, a minority museum, sometimes it's an attack and you're not going to have a conversation with people who are attacking you, and I don't want to, and I wouldn't expect my staff to. So there are times when we just go, that was their opinion, I don't have to like it, I don't have to respond to it, and we just shelve it. And there are the times when you have to say, okay, that is fair criticism, that is something that we had meant to get around to and we haven't, or it just wasn't even on our radar and we should be thinking about it. And I think you have to sort of stop for a second and just work out what it is, what are those three things it is, and then is it directed at a person, is it directed at your organization? I've had various examples, when somebody has watched something one of the team has live streamed and said to me, well, it was all wrong and it didn't represent, and it's my default position is they're never wrong, my team are amazing, I don't believe you, but it's I do have to take a step back. Okay, right, I should just check it, I'll watch it, I'll see if we missed a step somewhere. You have to understand that sometimes people are very emotional and passionate as well, so where they're coming from is the same place that you're coming from, and just trying to find that balance. But it is really hard. It's hard to take personal criticism, and because you put so much of your time and your energy into the plays, I find it very hard to find any boundaries. And then on top of that, the place where I work is so connected to my identity. it's like the people are often the same people. They're the people I meet in my family and my friends versus my sector life as well. So it's very, very hard. If someone critiques you and you're going to see them at a bar mitzvah the next week, I have to find like professional, personal boundaries are a serious issue for me. I'm not going to lie.
But thanks for being so honest, Fran. Yeah, boundaries are definitely an issue, and yeah, I can only empathise. Farhana, how do you feel about your museum being criticised?
I think exactly the same as both Fran and Laurie have said. It is incredibly difficult to take yourself out of the equation. And I think, what both of them said so far about being so passionate about the work that you do and being so, I like Fran was saying, I think my team are amazing, and I think the work that they do is fantastic. And it's really hard when you hear people who don't quite agree, or level criticism at them, or at the things that they're working on. We're a local authority museum, so that means that there's an added political element to our museum. So I think Ellie was talking about her trustees, whereas for us, it's we have an administration that is either in power and confident, or that they are in mid battle, and we can become something that criticism is leveled at because we're quite visible. So it's quite a difficult position to be in when you're the leader of a museum that's in that position, and you have to take those kind of criticisms on the chin and find ways around that, and find ways of kind of defending your team and defending the work that you do, whilst also remaining kind of apolitical. And as a museum, that's also really difficult to do. We're trying to make sure that we are relevant, and that we are reacting to things that are going on nationally, internationally, and that puts us in a tricky position. It's we're all, like everyone's saying, we're all really emotionally connected to everything that's going on. So yeah, it's a tricky one. It's really hard, and I don't think any of us have cracked it, and I don't think we will. I think it's just something that you have to live through.
Yeah, I think we'd all like to crack that. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and I'm going to just try and ask 2 more questions to everyone in a kind of shorter, quicker pace. So the next one is, what's the one thing you wish someone had told you before you got your current role? And I think Farhana looks like she has a thing.
Just get really good at spreadsheets, like really, really good at them. There's so many spreadsheets.
Love it. Marcus?
So again, I manage a very large staff, so I wish somebody would have told me that I should have probably taken a minor in human resources.
Absolutely. Laurie?
That you're going to need to get really good at ending phone calls and meetings on time.
Time
Particularly
management.
at the moment.
Yeah. Ellie?
I think one of the best things I was told was that for 95% of the decisions you make, it doesn't actually matter what decision you've made. You just need to make a decision so people can get on and do. Because if it's the wrong decision, you'll just change it. It doesn't matter. You just need to be able to enable people to do their jobs.
Amazing. And Fran?
Oh, there's such good ones. I think the only thing I'd probably add to that is, like the weight of responsibility will make you doubt yourself. Like it just will. I don't think anyone is made of steel. Like it definitely will make you doubt yourself. So I think it's just like recognizing it's going to happen, but you just got to, like you said, just got to make decisions. You got to do it, and you got to stay true to the what you had in mind at the beginning, because it's definitely coming.
And then in one of the questions that was submitted was, what are the 3 characteristics that you think makes a great museum leader, or manager, or leader at any level, I guess. And I think maybe Marcus looks the most ready to answer.
Someone who's collaborative, someone who's adaptable, and someone who doesn't take themselves too seriously.
Absolutely. And Farhana?
I don't think I've got three,
No?
but I think empathy is really important. And yeah, someone who is flexible. I think you need both of those really.
Great. And Laurie?
Yes, organised, kind of relationship building, but in the sort of broader sense. So like, identifying kind of personality types and how people like being communicated with, that sort of thing. And then also recognizing and ignoring your imposter syndrome.
Yeah. And Ellie?
First one's the same as Marcus, collaborating. I think that's absolutely essential. Listening is probably one of the best tools I have. And then I think actually liking people and wanting to work with people is so key, because if you don't want to work with people, don't go into a leadership role.
And Fran?
I think, yeah, I think when I thought about this, I think you need to have like the desire to want to ask questions like all the time. I think you also have to have a real desire for change, to want to make change. It's so easy just to be happy with where you're at because it feels safe. I think that constant feeling of wanting to make change is important. And I think also that real want for things to be transparent. I think when I think about the people I really admire in leadership, I think they're the ones who really show why they're making the decisions they're making, and they talk it through transparently.
Thank you so much, everybody. I feel very inspired after this session, and also a little bit more confident in my own abilities. And I hope other people who've been with us do as well. I really hope you've all enjoyed it. The session was being recorded, so we'll hopefully make that available. But I would really love everyone to thank our panelists for being so open, so honest, and so real in everything that they were saying about being a leader, which I think we all recognise is one of the hardest jobs in the world. And it's been a great pleasure to be with you all this evening. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
we will